Okay, so I wanted to go ahead and kind of throw a video together here just because I feel like it would kind of help for the community to understand a few things about a lot of the changes that the devs are trying to make with these, with what you guys have played in the beta branch, and also kind of what they're kind of the mindset that they're in as far as the balancing of the entire game, going past Cradle as well. Um, just have some video in the background of me running around making water for a bit just to kind of show how easy it is right now. Did it really inefficiently even then. But regardless, a few things I want to talk about is like the reasoning behind water, the reasoning behind stamina, schematics, bases, walkers, and the current implementation of AI as you guys see it in the cradle. Just real quick, who I am. My name is Emric. I go by Neon's dad right now in the official Discord. I'm one of the leaders of Driss. I've been playing Last Oasis since late summer, early fall of 2019 when I got in with the wave 4 of the beta testing. I've been playing off and on pretty much ever since then, in one form or another. Not long after I got into the beta, I was invited to be a super tester at that time. Been doing super testing all through the beta, did it through up until the clan wave. If anyone's familiar with that, it was the last like big beta wave that we did before official release. After clan wave, they kind of dropped the super tester program up until just a couple months ago, really. More like a month. And that's, I don't know what all the reasoning was for that, but a lot of the broken things that you've seen through the last 2-3 seasons has, I would say, a lot to do with the fact that they didn't have proper testing. Even some of the things that were in season 1 that got past the beta testers and the super testers at that point were added in mid-season or developed after testing had started. So I'm really happy that they're starting to bring testers back in. We'll see. Hopefully it helps. I know a lot of you guys are not very happy with the current balance of the cradle, even with some of the changes. So we'll get into that each individually for as far as those different aspects of it. But I can tell you, like it's better than it was when we first started testing it, quite a bit. We've gone back and forth from it being too easy, in some of our opinions, and way too hard. Just as a general overview, in my opinion, I would agree that the game right now is on the grindy side. Too much on the grindy side. But I understand why, and that's basically what we'll talk about. We'll start with water. Okay, so the reason that water is such a grind is because you're early into the game. You don't have a lot of the tools that you're going to have later. You don't have good tools. You don't have the stomper, the water collection, stuff like lakes and for contaminated water. All of that stuff will make water generation way easier. In the case of lakes, it might be too easy, and maybe we'll have to adjust or do something to nerf those. But the reason that the devs are trying to make water more scarce and a little more valuable is just due to overall balancing of the game. It's not used for traveling anymore, so your primary usage for it is going to be consumption to keep your character going and respawns, which even with respawns, for those that don't know, it's been reduced from 20 to 5 right now. So it takes 5 water to respawn. Some things that you guys might have noticed already is the not being able to place campfires on walkers. That's not just the Firefly. That's all walkers currently is the plan. Which kind of forces you to have to produce water at your base and then plan accordingly for whatever you're trying to do and bring that water with you. The other thing that you've noticed, and I know a lot of people have complained about, is the early bottles that hold 2 water. So there's a couple of reasons for both of these things. the early bottles is really simple. It's so that you have to go back to base every 10-20 minutes and sort of get you into that mentality and that sort of rhythm where instead of taking everything that you own like it was in previous seasons, we had a big issue with new players coming in, building a walker, putting everything they owned on that walker, all the crafting, everything else, going out with it, playing for, maybe a day or two even on some seasons before they ran into another player. But then they'd run into somebody else, they get PvP'd, their walker would get zeroed, they would lose literally everything that they had. Despite the fact that they had all of the tools in order to store things offline in the lobby. That happened all the time. Um, so that's why, not to try to get off track so much because we could go on forever on the lobby and the PvE maps and the reasoning behind them and all of that. But, you know, that's why you're limited on the bottle is Cradle, while it isn't like the tutorial map anymore, it is still sort of the tutorial map in that it's trying to teach people, hey, I have my base is safe, I store all my stuff in the base, I go out on short trips, I get stuff that I need, I bring it back, and I put it in the base. Which is like most survival games, really, but for Last Oasis, because it had a different direction before, that's something that the devs felt like they needed to, sort of drill into people. So that's why you only have 2 water in the bottle. That's something that I think that they'll probably change as well. That's definitely something that super testers kind of want to change, and a lot of you guys want to change, but I'm just kind of giving the reasoning behind why it's like that. Um, as far as just like water and water generation, it just goes into the balance of the game. None of the PvE content that they make, which you guys haven't seen any of really, like you're just seeing the tip of it. You haven't seen any of bosses. You haven't seen any of the battle mobs. You haven't seen anything really yet. Um, but the none of the all the PvE will be trivial if you can just respawn and go at it again. And that's the thing. It's like if you just respawn and go at it again, then who cares? If water's not an issue, who cares? Respawns don't matter. Surviving doesn't matter. You're not really surviving. Um, just for the entire game, you need water to be scarce now because, like I said at the beginning, once you have the tools and everything to generate it, if you make it too easy on Cradle, it'll be way too easy on the rest of the game. Um, so I know in like the super tester chats and stuff like that, we've been talking about potential changes and iterations to kind of make it easier to generate water on Cradle, but harder on other maps, so that you still have a little bit of that survival aspect of the game where you're trying to survive. I mean, you are in the desert. Water should be somewhat scarce at least, and you should need it a little. Like, you should need to think about it. Is what they're trying to get. Like, it should be something that you value instead of just some trivial thing that, yeah, I have to go farm water for 10 minutes so that I have water for the next week or whatever. That's what we're trying to get away from, or the devs are trying to get away from, rather. Um, that and just Chads in general wants the game to be more survival, um, less kind of just like gather all your materials up and go PvP forever. He wants a little more of that PvE side, a little more actual like survival thinking as far as like decision making on how you spend your resources and everything else. Um, so that's the gist on water. There's a lot more to it, like not being able to generate water on a walker and yada yada yada. But that's the overall gist of it. Stamina. I've seen a couple people complain about stamina on pickup. Stamina on pickup is something that I bitched about a ton in Super Testers chat. Um, so much so that it's actually more than halved what the stamina cost was originally. One of the tests that I jumped on and tried out, it was literally you would use like 25% of your stand bar every time you pick something up. So it was a bit of a joke as far as like trying to gather materials to make tools right at the beginning. Um, the reason that that is a thing is they don't want hand gathering to be more efficient than using tools. Um, Plus, on the other side, you'll notice that stamina plays into more aspects of the game than it ever did before. So it's trying to give a little more value to putting points into stamina itself so that you have a bigger stamina pool. And it has a little more value than just splitting your points between health and damage like most people did in the last few seasons. Um, so that's kind of stamina. There's a lot of things coming with stamina that will likely change more. Stamina with grappling hooks and how those two things play together is one. Stamina with wingsuits and how those two things play together. Um, just yeah, there's a lot of potential changes that we can make with stamina to kind of make it more valuable overall and more of a factor in the game. Um, Oh, one thing that we have talked about, and we'll see, it's completely up to the devs, but one of the things we have suggested, which we'll kind of get into schematics as well, is two things with the early game. Either making early game tools available just off the start where they don't have schematics, so like all your stone tools are just automatically available to you, or combining them all into one schematic. Kind of like how the Rupu fur armor stuff is, or like the fiber armor. You know, you have one schematic, but it makes all the different pieces of that type of armor. It'd be something similar for like stone tools, where you get a stone tool schematic, and it's up to you whether it makes a a sickle, a pickaxe, an axe, maybe even a repair hammer. Repair hammer is one we'll kind of talk about at the end because that's got more depth to it as well. Um, but yeah, so schematics overall, I hear a lot of people complain about it and that they don't like an RNG based system for schematics, which I completely understand. But it's not, according to the devs, from what we talked about with them, it's not a set percentage drop rate on schematics. There's other subsystems in it, sort of like pity systems, that, for instance, like if you knew that a dinghy schematic drops from the Rupu Ballista uh, POIs, which it does, and you go and you hit four of those ballistas and you just don't luck roll an actual dinghy schematic. You might get a couple legs, a couple wings, but you don't get the actual dinghy hull. Your percentage or your likelihood of getting that dinghy hull goes up the more POIs you hit and don't get it. Um, it might not work exactly like that, but that's kind of the overall gist as was explained to us on how it works. There's that side of it, but then there's the other side of certain things will drop certain things. Just like the Rupa Ballista have a high chance of dropping the dinghy schematics, but I've also picked up dinghy schematics off of other Rupu just around the area. I've luck rolled them off of that. It's just a really low chance. So there's that side, but then once you start getting into like bosses and stuff like that, then you know you can have like a the giant crab walker or boss. You know, it might drop something, have like a certain loot table on one map, say like it was on lava, but then you could also maybe like find it on sleeping giant. Just an example. Um, doesn't necessarily mean it'll be exactly like this, but it might have one loot table on that map and then a different loot table on the other, and you have a percentage chance of different items within that loot table. So what I'm basically trying to say is that it'll be probably less RNG later on in the game, where you know what you're trying to fight because you're trying to get this specific schematic. And the reason for schematics, but this is a bigger, so the more I think about it, the more big of an area of discussion this is. So a couple things about schematics. Well, why schematics instead of the old system? Schematics is just it makes you have to keep playing the game. You can't build up a bank and then just be done with the game. I mean, you can to some degree, but it's a lot harder with schematics. And the other thing about schematics was, large clans before with tablets, you'd send 20 to 50 guys out farming fragments, and within a couple days, assuming they had the maps up, that's why they sometimes didn't even open hard maps up until a week or two into the game. Once you had those maps up, you just go make the tablets and you'd be done with the tech tree in like 2 weeks or less. So it just doesn't work out very well. But yeah, that's a big reason behind it, and why we're switching, or why they're switching over to a schematic system, is it stops that sort of thing from happening where you can just funnel people and then be done with the tech tree 2 weeks into the game. The other side of it, and I see a lot of people complain about this, and this is something of a bit of a contention or conflict in staging chat or super tester chat, is whether or not schematics should be condensed, kind of like I was talking about with the stone tools, where all these different tools are under one schematic, so it takes up less room, or having like schematic specific items, like a schematic specific bag, which is actually in the game, it's just you don't have access to it yet, it's later on, or like a schematic specific locker or cabinet. The reason why the devs don't really want to do that is the schematics are supposed to take up a lot of space. That is intended that they take up a lot of space, both in your inventory, but especially in your base. Because the way that the whole system now works with PvE tiles and PvE bases and everything like that, and the maintenance costs that you have to maintain in order to keep those bases up, the more that the devs can make you have a larger base, the more balanced that'll be as far as how much loot you can actually store on a PvE tile in a base. So for instance, maybe you have to have 4 or 5 boxes of just schematics in your base. So now you're talking, several foundations at least, and then you have to have, more boxes for your materials, and then you probably want crafting, and then your base just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you have to make a decision of, is this base too much and I need to make another base or downsize, or do I need to just get rid of my old schematics so I don't have as much build up anymore? It's just one of those sort of decisions of, do you want to pay the tax to have this larger bank essentially on a PvE map? So that's one of the balancing aspects that they're going for with PvE maps and bases on them, and how much you can store and everything else. So that's a few reasons why on schematics. There's more to those actually. Now to try kind of talk about bases. I know a lot of people are upset, and I agree completely with the fact that the game is shifting from a mobile base sort of gameplay, which was really cool about last Oasis, and it made it really unique, with the walkers and everything like that, to a more static base game, which really it's kind of been to a degree for a while now, with stone and clay and all that other stuff. The only difference is before it was even safer because you had the lobby where you could offload stuff to that. So even if somebody raided you, they wouldn't get anything. So the reason for bases is it's part of the replacement of the lobby system, which we already talked about why it didn't really work. Um, Bases on PvE, like I just talked about, you have the higher maintenance cost. You'll need to, maintain them, and if you make it too big, then it's not, you can't really maintain it very well. There'll probably be other systems added in to limit how many different bases you can build on PvE. I know we've talked about in Super Tester chat is, ways of maintaining the cost to maintain it while reducing the overall footprint so that we don't have lag on servers, on PvE servers. We'll see how that all ends up playing out. Obviously, we haven't nearly gotten to that point in the game yet. Um, so that's one thing with the PvE side and everything with bases. On the PvP side, it's in a way sort of the same thing. Not only, which I won't talk about it too much, but with the new travel systems, which they've kind of talked about in the dev blocks, having bases or fobs on different tiles is going to be definitely something that you see more often. That also ties into the whole not being able to make water on your walker. Um, you won't be able to make water on your walker, so you need a base to make walker. So that kind of anchors you down to one spot. Um, Hard points on walkers and how much harder walkers are in general to get limits how many slots on that walker you can put. So do I make the decision to turn my walker into a crafting walker where it doesn't have very much defensive or offensive capabilities instead of going for, say, a base, which you now have to maintain, but it has all the crafting stuff in it and allows your walker to be more of a combat platform and less of a mobile base. I know that all of this is a huge change and a lot of people don't like it. Like I said before, I don't necessarily like it myself, but as I'll talk about here in a minute, walkers still do play a major part in the game. Um, I know some people are like, it's just Ark, but instead of dinosaurs, you have wooden dinosaurs. And, to a degree, that's fair. I do think that that's kind of how it's playing out. But I mean, just to put it plainly, the game's been out for 2 years now. Um, it lost 90% of its population in the first like 3 or 4 months, and it's never even really come close to getting that population back. So while I understand the game is a really cool concept, it's just there's so many aspects of it that need to change in order to appeal to a wider audience anymore. And that's really what it all falls into for a lot of these changes is, having 300 concurrent players is not sustainable for a game like this. We definitely need a lot more players in order to justify keeping the game open, really, and not just being a private server thing. Which, in my opinion, honestly, I think if you added in modding, private servers wouldn't be that bad. But that's a whole different thing. So that's sort of the thing around bases. And yes, now, like I was saying, okay, I'll kind of get into this a little bit more, trying not to touch into the travel system too much because they haven't revealed much on that yet. But um, with needing to have bases on different tiles, like you'll need one on the different types of tiles, right, to go get that stuff. You need to maintain all of these different bases. So that's more resources put into it, which stops you from building up too high. And it also kind of limits you to a specific area, which is part of what Chads wants to do with the game, is try to make it a little more regional in the fact that you have your territory that you play out of, and your neighbors, whether they be friendly or foes. You know who they are, and you kind of play around that. If you get into a bad situation, you can move without necessarily being tracked down and harassed too much. Some PvP players won't like that, but overall, I think most people can realize it's better for the overall population of the game. Um, so there's that side of it. There's the whole balance with the new siege mechanics on how bases work for raiding. Now that there isn't the lobby system, yeah, there's PvE maps, but has this clan taken the stuff out of their PvP fob or PvP base and moved it to PvE this week? I've seen some PvP clans say like, I'll move it every freaking day. I'll get a logistics crew in and I'll move it, but with some of the travel systems and no lobby and having to go through multiple maps sometimes to get back to PvE, I just don't see people doing that very much. Some people will, but I don't see it happening very much. Um, so there's that side of it. There's more base rating. Base rating is actually more of a thing, or will be more of a thing. Um, I know a lot of people are concerned about offline rating and stuff like that. I agree. It's all stuff that needs to be looked at. Probably some sort of offline rate protection. Um, a lot of balancing on how rating works, and just there's a ton of stuff that goes into the PvP side of the game that hasn't really been touched on very much yet. At least not to my knowledge, as far as balancing and all that stuff. So we'll definitely get into that at some point. Um, so that's kind of basis. As far as walkers kind of play into that a little bit more. So not only will you need walkers for a lot of the content that you haven't even seen yet, so you still need walkers, you still need to have them, you still need to upgrade them and so forth in order to do harder content and whatnot on the PvE side. But also walkers are still your form of transportation around the maps. They're your logistics trains, and they're also your way of reaching out your influence past even where you have bases set up. Um, so there's a lot of that tied into it. Kind of talking about walkers more. You have to prepare better. Like I mentioned before, I think most people will want their walkers to be what we'd call war walkers, where they're kitted out. They have the kits, they have the respawns, they have modules for PvP, they have the deck guns and everything loaded up and ready. You have all of that prepared. You have to bring the water with you or be ready to set up a fob in order to generate water. There's just a lot more preparation and thought that goes into it. And when you start talking about PvP, that turns out to be, really, really important because kind of PvP is kind of a hard thing to talk about because we haven't seen large population since season 1. And the PvP meta has definitely shifted since then, even with the smaller population. But what the actual PvP meta is with a large population, if we ever had it, is probably different than what we're currently seeing. It almost certainly is different than what we're currently seeing. But one of the things we do see even now, and we saw in season 1, was if you attacked somebody on their home tile or one of their home tiles, you might wipe them out, unless you're talking like tile capping, right? You might wipe them out, but then they'll just show up again on another walker that they have ready, and then another, and then another, and then another, and eventually they'll wear you down and kill you. Or even if they're not on their home tile, they'll be, on a neighboring tile, and then the next thing you know, you start fighting them. 40 other people show up on 3 or 4 other walkers that they had just sitting in the L ready to go. They just go into the L screen, grab the walker, everybody jumps on, and they're there in 5 to 10 minutes before the fight's even done. So it's like the lobby created a lot of those issues, and having pre-made walkers and stuff like that created a lot of issues, let alone with the lag with not having hardpoint systems and just the overall balance. It's just basically what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is walkers in season 5 are going to be a lot more balanced than they are currently. Well, maybe not balanced, maybe not even be the right word for it. It just, one of the issues that I always had was with last Oasis, and one of the reasons that I stopped playing at the different times that I did, was walker combat and ranged combat was the meta. Especially when you had large populations. It's always been range combat is meta. But the range combat in this game with walker fighting was just dog shit. It was just who had more guns, more people, and could DPS out enough to break your leg off first. That was Walker fighting. I mean, there was some tactics to it with boarding and multiple walkers and setup and yada yada, but I mean, really most of the time it was ram your walker into the enemy ship. Sometimes literally only having walkers for that purpose of ramming them into the enemy ship to slow it down or disable it, breaking a leg off, and then it was GG. Like you were done. Like, and it's just such a dog shit system in my opinion. It doesn't require a lot of skill. Um, it just it people are complaining about the grind now. Back in season one when you were grinding ammo all the time, I mean, I don't know, man. I feel like that was a lot worse grind than even what we're seeing in the cradle right now. So with walkers and limited spawns with the water, not being able to generate water, not having like an entire base worth of crafting for ammo and storage and everything else, kind of limiting their potential unless you prepare really well. Just and then just how the siege guns and the walkers all interact together as far as the deck guns and stuff. All of that's getting reworked. It's just overall going to be a lot better in my opinion. Um, uh, that's kind of where walkers are in a way. The last thing I'll kind of touch on briefly is just the AI, as far as like the Rupu and stuff like that with PVE. I understand that people are pretty disappointed with what they've seen so far with the PVE content. Um, Obviously, they made it harder to progress. That's like the number one thing. And like I said at the beginning, I think it's too grindy. But on the flip side, I've seen some people complaining about the range Rupu, like the ballista and the thrower ones just being OP. Yeah, they are, but you can kind of cheese them if you learn how, and not just hiding behind stuff. Like especially now that they're inaccurate, you can literally use them to kill other Rupu. Um, if you make it too easy, like if you like a lot of suggestions I see are limit their ammo. If you limit their ammo, then you just hide behind something until they run out of ammo, and then you go kill it. Like it's not a threat anymore. It's just not a threat. Um, I will tell you that the AI was a lot harder, even in super testing playthroughs. Um, that server was EU. I'm in A West, so I had a real rough time with it. But they used to be like blocking gods. Like they were hard to kill. Um, some people like Milo said it was easy because they weren't fainting or chambering him. But for a cradle map, as far as what new players run into for their first experience in the game, they had to make it a little easier for the melee side. For the range side, again, that kind of comes down to making it somewhat difficult to actually like overcome that obstacle while not making it, overly ridiculously hard or super cheesable where it's just not it's easy just to rush through and then you're done. That's not what they wanted to do with this, and I really don't think that adding ammo where they have limited shots is the answer here. Um, One of the things that I've noticed is people they think that they have aimbot and they don't. They have insane prediction, which I guess you could debate whether or not that's the same thing or not. But even back before that, he made them actually less accurate than they are or were at the start of the test. You could sidestep the throws. You would feint like you were going right, then as he was throwing the spear or the rock or whatever, and then dodge left and it'd go right by you. Now, once you got up close to him, it was a little harder to do, but it was more like gauging the distance after he threw and then rushing him before he got the next shot off. Which, with the Ballista Rupu, was a whole different thing because they shoot like a machine gun. But regardless, there is that side of it. I think they used to hit harder too, but we're with the AI in general. You're only seeing the beginning of the AI. There's so much more to come. New types of Rupu, new types of creatures, just in general. The bosses, the battle mobs. It's just there's a lot more on the PVE side that's been worked on and or being worked on that you just haven't seen yet. The cradle as a whole is kind of your first introduction into the game. The PVE side can't be too difficult. I know some people feel like it's easy and cheesable, other people feel it's too difficult or annoying. I I think that's just comes down to perspective on that. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of hard to balance because you want it to be somewhat of a roadblock, but you don't want it to be overly ridiculous. And I feel myself that right now it's pretty good. Obviously, they can make AI better to where like the range Rupu don't just throw stuff at a wall until you run out, but or until they run out if they had limited ammo. That just takes so much dev time, and you guys have to remember it's still a fairly small team here that we're working with, and um, they just can't put that much time into Cradle if nothing else. When Cradle is I mean, you'll be able to come back to Cradle, but I just don't see people spending a lot of time here after their first couple days or so. Maybe even just first couple hours, honestly. So, anyway, that's sort of that. I did this little run with water that you're kind of watching in the background just to kind of see how much water I could generate in 30 minutes, and I did really poorly as far as like being efficient with it. But I think in the end I was like 60 water or something like that I did in 30 minutes, maybe even more. Maybe it was like 70 or something with what I had cooking. I forgot to add up exactly what it was, but yeah, I think water right now is after the changes that they made is pretty easy, but I think it might be too easy especially once we get to other maps and get stompers and everything like that. Um, but yeah, that's kind of an overall look at kind of the mindset behind some of the changes. Hopefully, this video makes it a little easier to kind of understand what they're trying to do with the game. Um, and obviously, there's a lot of aspects to it that I just couldn't get into. The video is already at like 40 minutes, and um, yeah, maybe I'll make another one on specific things, like the water and walkers and AI and stuff like that later. But I just wanted to throw this out there to kind of give a little insight into the game. Anyways, thanks.